There are no prizes for guessing that this isn't a model railway, but it is the sort of scene and atmosphere that railway modelers try to recreate in miniature. But before you rush off to build your model railway, you ought to plan it, and plan it carefully. Now, this is an example what a plan like this looks like. Here you are, track diagram. It shows you your turnouts, it shows you your platform, it shows you the structures here, station building, engine shed, everything. It gives you a chance to look at the capabilities of your layout itself. And if you are even more ambitious, you can build a model of the model itself, like this one here. This is very large, it belongs to a club, and it shows very clearly what you can do. Now let's take this little baseboard here. Here you see the two levels of the track. Very clearly, you see the contours of the countryside, and if you turn it over, you can even see the construction of the baseboard itself. And this is the moment when you can make your mistakes and rectify them. But there are two ways of building a baseboard. One is to put a solid top, like this one on here. We covered this area completely just to show you. And we used a material which is not really ideal. It's called hardboard. Look, it's springy and at the same time noisy. Not an ideal material. So if you want to cover your baseboard completely, solidly, use this sort of material. This is insulation board. It's not so flexible and it's not so noisy. It's much better. And there's another way of doing it, using an open structure like this. You would pin your bearers for the track bed down like that, and track bed on top here. And when the track goes on finally, it would look something like that. The advantages are that you've got nice embankment here. You could put your rivers neatly under there without actually cutting away the board, or your road underpasses. And your scenery could then come up here very easily. It's totally accessible all the time, and we call it an open-top baseboard. Now, in our last program, we showed you how we went down to the Bluebell line to record Horsted Keynes Station. Now, these are some of the photographs we took, and these are some of the sketches we made. Having done our research and having planned the layout, the next job is obviously to get down and build it. So we've asked a practicing model maker to show us how it's done. Jack Kind, where do we start?
Well, the scenery came first, Bob, and that's where we've started. We've had to lay part of the track in this case because of time. But as you can see, I've already got part of this hillock that's very, very prominent at Horsted Keynes already up, and I've left this piece open. I've been working on it. Now, this is a method of construction which is slightly peculiar to me in that it is made from cardboard strips, which are the contour shapes. They are latticed together with other pieces of card to form this geodetic structure, which, although it's fairly springy, is able to support the top coating. For the top coating, I use a material which can be purchased from a dress shop for stiffening underskirts and so on, and that is cut into a number of squares, about 4 by 3 inches, and that will be applied to this particular card structure. To stick the material to the card, I use a plastic compound which comes in dry powder form and mixed with hot water produces a rather delicious goo like that, about that consistency. Now, to put the stuff on, you start to lay it up, not too thickly, but attaching it wherever the material sticks to the card. Allow an overlap and work your way along in that fashion.
It's rather like putting a bandage on, isn't it? A plaster of Paris bandage.
Very similar, Bob, very similar. It's also not unlike laying up glass fibre when you're building boats and car bodies, only in a miniature form. Now this we continue right the way up like this. If we had been cooking, Bob, I should have said I've got one in the oven and I'll get it out in a moment. But I'm hoping I can get this on so that everyone can see exactly what I'm doing.
I see you putting one layer on rather than...
I'm only putting one layer on at this stage, and in a minute when I've reached the top, which is up here, I shall come back downstairs and start with another layer. Get a bit more of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jack, how do you get a sort of texture into that?
Well, this will come, Bob, when we get the second coat over the top of this. And already you'll see what I'm getting at. Any holes you fill up. Lay it across at different angles. It doesn't matter if it doesn't follow through exactly square, but you must be sure that you get it all firmly attached to the structure underneath. And you'll discover as you work your way through this stuff that the material that I'm using softens up under the action of the plaster or paint or goo and the material itself, and it becomes practically self-adhesive. In fact, it's really quite sticky right now.
Now, when you want to shape it?
Now we want to shape it, we can start then to apply the stuff in a much thicker form. And this, I will use a spatula, and you can apply it like that. And within about an hour or more, that will be dry. I think, if you don't mind, Bob, I'll carry on to the top part here.
Now, when you want to plant, for instance, bushes into that, Jack,
Well,
how would you go about that?
this is a very versatile gunk, this stuff. And if you want to plant a bush, take your bush and plant it
Just like that?
with the roots.
That's firm.
That's firm, or will be when it's dry.
Now, we really are sort of at a white stage of this fellow here. How would you eventually bring it to life?
Well, the next stage in the game, Bob, I'll let that dry now, is to move on to the painting stage. And for that, you will need some emulsion paint, some good brushes, a palette, and some watercolour paints. These are artist watercolours. And I'm already, having laid this particular part out, decided where the grass is going to go, where this particular scree has come. You see how it can be modelled up.
Mm-hmm.
And by applying your paint to that particular scree, it goes into the texture, and immediately you'll see what will happen. I'll pick an earth line, which I know is a bit lower down, around about there. And I'll work. Now, can you see the way the colour begins to run into that?
It comes to life.
And all that texture is picked up immediately by that.
What's that?
That's, I'm just getting the colours darker. I'm using umber and black at this stage because I'm trying to get this scree to come really high. You needn't be frightened of using plenty of water on this. It doesn't do any harm at all. Can you see the way that texture picks up with the colour run on it? Get it dug into some of those deeper places. This is virtually three-dimensional painting.
Well, let's leave Jack Kine with painting and talk a little about track laying. Because model railway layouts which have badly laid track don't run well and are very disappointing. Well, someone who has laid virtually all gauges of track is Fleetwood Shaw. Fleet, what advice for beginners, please?
Well, the beginners have virtually got two choices from the point of view of track. They have prefabricated lengths of curves to standard radius and straights, and they have flexible track, which can be flexed to any configuration that's required.
Right, well, if, for instance, the beginner has bought some of this track, is he stuck with this curve?
No, he isn't. This can be modified so that it can be curved to any radius, simply by cutting through one of the, every fourth or so web between the sleepers with a fine saw, such I'm doing now. I've done the rest of them already. Mm-hmm. And then it can be, in fact, flexed either to a sharper radius or to a less sharp radius, just as required.
Well, now, what about joining track? Are there snags?
Yes, well, joints are snags. They're the Achilles heel of the railway track system. These have, in fact, fish plates provided, but they don't necessarily provide an immaculately good joint always, and they sometimes require certain attention with a small pair of pliers. And if there's any suggestion of a bump, this again can be rectified using a small Swiss file, 2 strokes, and the feel of the finger is the best test as to whether it's right or not.
Well, now we've got a track joined, and that's a curve directly joined to a straight. That isn't a good idea.
Well, you know very well that it isn't, Bob.
And it is well.
The way to get over this, really, simply, is never to allow a joint to occur at the junction between a curve and a straight. And if you arrange for a long length of flexible track such as this, I'm laying it together so that you can see the effect, you automatically get a nice, sweet transition between the straight and the curve.
Yes, there's a remarkable difference, really. If you look at it here, this goes straight and then sharply into the curve, and here you've got a very gentle, very sweet curve starting.
Well
It
worth doing.
must be a much sweeter
Well worth
running.
doing, yes.
Well, that much about straight track. Now, what about points, or I think, as you would call it, turnouts?
Yes, I would call them turnouts. Well, the main thing to say about these is simply that you use the longest radius, in other words, the longest turnout, longest lead, that you have the space for. And in fact, on running lines, use the longest ones. These shorter ones are all right for sidings.
So, these turnouts for the main line, and if you've got those, use them only in sidings.
Preferably.
Right. What about track laying itself?
Well, the simplest method of track laying is simply to pin the track, whether it's prefab or flexible, loosely pin it onto the roadbed, which we can do now. But the secret is not to pin it down too hard, not to use a hard glue and glue it down. It'll allow some resilience, some movement.
Well, this looks a bit stark. I wouldn't be very satisfied with that.
No, well, there are ways and means of producing a better looking job. This particular length has been ballasted with carpet tape, which is in fact an adhesive backed tape for sticking carpets together or down. And,
Available in any carpet shop?
Available in any carpet shop. And the track has been placed on it, and the ballast in fact is granular cork, which has been spread over and then loosely dusted off. This end's been painted to show the considerable improvement by applying a little paint.
It looks much better, but say I'm a real purist and I want a Rolls Royce of tracks, what then?
Well, to build more resilience in, which is highly desirable really, lay it on Sorbo rubber, again using a rubber adhesive, and this really gives you resilience.
Yes, you can see the track is sprung. The same spot 2.5 hours later. Well, I think it's quite remarkable what Jack's been able to achieve. Just look at it. That cliff, that little promontory, and you can see where the water that's come down has cut a little runnel in the cliff face, and it's gone down and taken some of the cliff with it, and a little shrub growing at the bottom. And here you can see the water sort of eroded a little bit of the soil out of the cliff face, and it's streaked down there, dirtying it. And further down, the chalk, the little strip of chalk has come down and crumbled and screed down to the base, and the fresh grass is growing on it, and shrubs everywhere, spring grass and light green, and the railway. It's quite amazing. I think it's most impressive and really exciting. Well, Jack, what next?
Well, Bob, you said bushes, so now let's put in some trees. And I'll produce some trees for you. Now, the prescription for trees is a piece of soft wire, about 1 foot long, some hairy string from your friendly newsagent.
What, just ordinary string?
Just ordinary hairy string. It's got to be the hairy variety, which you cut into 2 or 3 inch lengths. So
Yes.
these will then be unwound and broken up into their original strands.
What, just teased out?
Just teased out so that you get little packs of what will be the branches of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
About 3 of these, I think 2 or 3 of these will do. Now this is where I'm hoping you're going to give me a hand. The next thing you do is you take your piece of wire, you bend it, and you place it in a drill chuck, so, which goes on a nail. And Bob, if you can feed that
Yes.
little hairy bed of hamster's nest in there,
I'll just like this through the
That's
thing
right.
and
spread them so they're fairly evenly dispersed.
yes, like this.
Pretty good. And I'll take over from there.
Right.
Now you wind away until the wire breaks, which it's done. We'll cut a piece off like that. Now, I think I ought to get rid of that bit in the middle there. Now, by pushing this around a bit, you've got the semblance of a rather untidy looking, but nevertheless easily recognised tree.
Yes.
So now, before it gets its leaves, it needs a haircut. And get rid of some of the longer twigs that hang out. Shape it generally.
This is the moment where you can turn it into an apple tree if you want.
Yes, you can turn it into an apple tree. Now, we've got to get the leaves to stick to the string.
Yes.
So I use polyurethane varnish for this. Now you can use shellac, but I personally prefer it. And the object of the manoeuvre is to get all that string saturated, so in it goes.
You just dunk it.
Dunk the lot.
Yes.
And with a piece of stick, make sure that every particle of string is covered. Now we're at the messy stage. Because if you can imagine doing this in the kitchen, you get it everywhere.
Yeah, that looks horrid.
Now let it drain a reasonable time, so you get rid of the surplus varnish. Now I've still got to get a lot of that varnish off. And Bob, I have by the side of you down there a bucket. If you'd be a friend and bring it up.
There we are. 1 bucket.
I pops it in. Now I'm spinning the tree now to spin off the surplus varnish.
Yes.
Now comes the moment of truth. This is when the leaves go on.
What are you putting on? What
That
is
is
that?
coloured sawdust, Bob. No more, no less.
Just coloured
Just
sawdust.
coloured sawdust.
But it's got different colours.
There are 3 colours mixed together here. I like to use a little brown and a darker green in it. And there is your tree.
That's really remarkable. That's beautiful.
Want me to plant it?
Yes, please. But I think that is quite remarkable. It looks perfect. Jack, what else can you do?
Well, now, if you take the same basic shape, tree, and you tease one up and one down, you get 3 for the price of 1. 1 little fir tree, 1 little poplar tree.
That's very
Treated
good.
in the same way. Well, on Sunday, my younger daughter helped me make some trees. She'd never made them before. I suppose, Bob, I better not waste any more time. I'll go tree planting.
That's it. Well, the scenery is virtually completed, Jack. What about the buildings now?
Well, we took the photographs and drawings, and from those, I started work now on the main station.
It looks fabulous. It looks terribly complicated.
No, it isn't, Bob. It is only a series of boxes. That's all it is. One alongside the other. Nicely, carefully cut. Everything nice and square. Time taken is well worth it. They look complex. The window frames and the door frames and things may look a bit complex, but in fact they're not.
What's the material you're using for this?
This is a plastic card, fairly thick for certain areas and thin on others. But I mean, you can get the feel of the stuff quite easily to get the thickness of the lintels right, etc.
It looks really wonderful. What does it look like when you've painted it on the other side?
I've painted the other side, as you can see. And I think to show it, I'll put it down in position. Make sure that I don't overhang the platform, that's right.
It really looks superb. It really does look good. That roof is weathered. It's got lichen on it.
And that's here, yes.
I see you've even got the pointing on the chimney there. How do you get this extraordinary effect on the brickwork?
Well, Bob, the card is embossed and it is painted with oil paint.
Oh, this is the material
This
it's
is the
made
material
of.
it is made from. It's an embossed card. The brickwork's already embossed, but you can't see it because the pointing is too dark.
Yes.
And we use our old friend, the plastic material that has been used for the layout, and with a little judicial rubbing, it fills all those little cracks up, and immediately the mortar shows up.
Ah, there you are. You can see the pointing.
Yep. And it has also taken the colour down a mite, which is a good thing to do.
Yes, well, this is quite remarkable. But now look at the canopy, for instance. That's aged and weathered, and it's got a sort of wet look about it,
Well,
hasn't it?
that's achieved again by thinning out the paint, and the final wet look is achieved by, well, I hope the wife doesn't mind, I pinched some of her hairspray.
Well done.
The main station building, the long one. Again, I've only started work on this. I haven't finished the roof or the underside, but that pops in there.
That looks very smart.
I think we ought to put a signal boxing. Now this, as opposed to these two, which were scratch built, was made from one of the paper kits.
Ah, yes. It's a paper kit.
Yes, and it's remarkably like the Horsted Keynes signal box, which is rather nice. I've changed the windows a little, that's all. And Bob, perhaps we
Shall I
could
put
pop
it in
that
for you?
Thank you.
Right. There we go. I think that's where she went. Nice and square.
Lovely.
That's it. There she is.
And I think, finally, Bob, a little hut, which should go in somewhere.
The bothy. Without a bothy, no railway is complete.
Is
There
that
she
so?
goes. Nice and square again. And home and dry. Well, Jack, we've got so far. But what else have you got to do?
A lot of work yet, Bob. The station roof to be completed, chimneys to go on, steps into the subway, handrail round it, people, bicycles, a load more work. But one thing we do need, and I think we can get it now, and that is something every layout needs, and that is a backcloth, a sky. So if you like, I'll call one up. Okay, boys, lower it in.
Well, there it is. A double O-gauge model of Horsted Keynes Station on the Bluebell line. In the next program, we shall complete the layout with the wiring and the signals. But let's end this one by mixing from our model to the real Horsted Keynes Station.